Hello and welcome to another episode of this nice Srad build. As you can see, and if you have seen the other videos, you will already know that this engine is almost done and almost good to go back in the frame. So right now I'm just tightening up the last remaining bolts of these aluminum brackets that hold down the camshafts. Get a few bits and pieces in there, like there is one chain guard still missing that sits on top of those two brackets, and the oil feed from the exhaust side bracket to the intake side bracket still hanging loose on the side. So these few things still need to go back in place, be tightened down, and then I can put on the gasket between the cylinder head and this valve cover, and finally put the valve cover back on, screw this down, and then I have to do the starter clutch mechanism, and I think then I'm almost done, but that's something you will see later. As you can see, I'm just checking if all the bolts are tightened down correctly. Then I have to loosen up this one so I can move the oil feed, which connects both of these brackets later on. Here you can see the bolt that will go in there. It's just a standard M6 bolt, nothing fancy, nothing with a hole in it, because like the hole in which the bolt sits is slightly larger, so the oil can flow around this bolt into the galleries. So the oil galleries, all feed lines are in place, and the next thing to go on there is this chain guard piece thing. It's just been tightened down by two M6 bolts, fairly easy, and it secures the chain from jumping over these sprockets, these gears. Next in line are the spark plugs, 4 of them of course. I'm just going to reuse some old spark plugs I had lying around, because I don't know, if they still work they're fine for me. I don't need anything fancy like iridium spark plugs or whatever. So as you can see, these spark plugs are out of different engines. The one on the left is from a engine I had running earlier, and the one on the bottom, which looks brighter, is from this very engine we are working on right now. I took it out of the old cylinder head in an earlier video and had a look at it. So those go in there, and then they need to be tightened down with a 16mm nut. Fairly easy. Don't tighten them down too hard, or you could damage the threads, since they're just cut into the aluminum of the cylinder head. So all spark plugs are in place and being tightened down correctly. The next thing is I'm going to reuse the old gasket for the valve cover, since I think I said it earlier, those are quite expensive around here in Germany. They are like 35 to 40 euros. So These are just rubber gaskets with some metal inlays in them. So I'm using some liquid gasket silicone sealant stuff. It's the one that's recommended by Suzuki in their manual. I don't know, I think you could use Durco HT or normal Durco, or any silicone you have, like Hylomar or whatever you have lying around in your shop. It doesn't really matter. I like this stuff because it's black, so it's quite subtle if you don't overdo it. And right here I'm using the tool which comes with the tube of the sealant. I'm just going to apply a really thin layer of silicone sealant around the sealing surface, because I want to make sure that no silicone gets squished into the engine when I apply the clamping force of the bolts to the valve cover. So I think less is better, especially around this place where pointed now. This is usually the weak spot of the engine, like down here with the head gasket, and up there with this rubber gasket for the valve cover, because the head bolts are quite far from this place, so that I don't know, I think there isn't that much clamping force on this edge. So they have this bolt coming from underneath, which is just an M6 bolt, so not that strong. I don't know. Usually all the engines I had tend to leak right there. So here comes our old gasket. Yeah, I took this out of the engine earlier when during the disassembly videos, and I just gave it a quick clean with some paper towel to get any sand or dirt off there. And now I'm just gently pushing it into the place it needs to be. Be careful with those metal inlays left and right of the cylinder head, these half circle pieces. Make sure that those sit quite nice. And of course these pins. Yeah, so everything needs to be right in place, otherwise the valve cover won't sit properly. Here we have the actual valve cover itself. It's made of magnesium, nice and light. And again, with this piece I'm going to apply some of this silicone sealant liquid gasket stuff I used there. And I will put some into the actual groove where the gasket will be sitting, so that the gasket is like supported with this silicone stuff from both sides, so none of the oil can get past. Now we have our nice sealant in there. Now it's time to gently place the valve cover in the right position. Be careful with this rubber gasket, especially if you're going to reuse it like I did. Make sure it really sits in the groove before you start forcing it down, because on the front and the back, so exhaust or intake side, this rubber gasket easily can be pushed out, and then you squish it the wrong way, and I don't know, that's just not good. So look what you're doing before you do it. Be gentle, and if it looks good, apply some pressure to force it down, and then you're all good. So next up are the 6 bolts that clamp down this valve cover onto the cylinder head. They have little rubber or plastic or hard rubber, some kind of that, washers underneath them, which acts like a seal against the valve cover. So 6 of them go in there. I don't think that there is a certain order in which you need to tighten them down. One goes in there. So yeah, just tighten them down. You will feel a very good detent if you are on the end of the thread. So don't overdo them. Just tighten them down so the seal under them gets nice and squished. A little bit of the silicone maybe will come out. You can wipe it off with a piece of paper, and yeah, then you're good. So the last thing we forgot on this side is the main oil feed for the cylinder head. You just take one of these hollowed out bolts, which are very similar to the ones on your brake calipers. Put 2 new copper washers in there and tighten it down real good so the copper washers get crushed and seal up pretty good. So another thing you can do is to grab a piece of paper or a rag or whatever you have in hand and wipe off this excess silicone sealant so the whole engine looks a bit nicer. And of course we need to reassemble the starter clutch mechanism. As you can see, put in this gear first, it's a pair of gears, and I'm able to rotate the gear in one direction but not in the other, which is fairly important. So the starter motor can start the engine, but as soon as the engine starts turning, this clutch disengages and the engine won't turn the electric starter motor. Again, here I'm reusing all the gaskets I can because yeah, it's work to do new gaskets, and if the old ones aren't broken or cracked or ripped or damaged in any kind, I made good experiences by just reusing them. I always put some grease on these gaskets, on these paper gaskets, to ensure that they don't stick to the castings. So if I take this starter clutch mechanism off again, there's little chance that I will damage the gasket between the two parts, because when there is some grease on this gasket, it will come off fairly easy. One thing you might miss here is there are some spring washers fairly thin under this next set of gears. This is like a small gear again, which hooks into the lower gear, which you can see right now, and then there is a large gear on there too, which yeah, connects to the actual starter motor itself. So, but first I will put some of the bolts in there again. These are the old bolts I took off there earlier. I put them into this nice sorting box, because in fact those bolts are individual lengths, so they're like 4 or 3 different lengths to the bolts. Each one has their own hole, their own thread, so you don't want to mix them up, or you have to figure out which bolt goes where and stuff. So that's what I'm doing now. As you can see, there are some bits and pieces still missing, which will go on there later during the day.